Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I'm your host, Giordano. As president and owner of the architecture and design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for disruption and radically changing the architecture industry through tech-first innovation. With this podcast, I am hoping to improve the industry that I am so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work with their clients and, in turn, how their clients view us. It's my goal to showcase all of these experiences, good and bad. Was it the architect or the client, or somewhere in between? Through shared experiences, stories, and projects, my hope is that we can improve our profession. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have Dena Prastos, AIA, founder of Indigo River, as my guest here on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Dena is an architect, an engineer, as well as a futurist, and as you will see, all-around creative original. She's inspired by the intersection of design, technology, and nature. Born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska, Dena has a deep-rooted appreciation for nature and mankind's ability to design, build, and create resilient infrastructure in some of the world's toughest conditions. She has led projects around the world, including heavy civil construction, marine engineering, and waterfront architecture. A graduate of NJIT in architecture and NJIT in civil engineering, and from Harvard Business School. As if that wasn't impressive enough, her career has taken her from the Staten Island ferry terminal to the Israeli Defense Force to the Black Sea in Georgia. In 2016, she joined McLaren Engineering Group, where she worked in the Marine and Infrastructure Department, leading the design team on New York City's citywide ferry projects. Then, as a director for DCAK MSA Architecture to round out her architecture experience. Taking from all these diverse learning experiences, in 2018, she founded Indigo River, a certified women's-owned business enterprise, WBE, committed to helping our society evolve together with our environment. Dena, thank you for agreeing to be here on the podcast. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Christian.
Awesome. So you have a really interesting background, and I'm really excited to talk to you about kind of how all of this has come to be, from your education to where you are now and the different types of projects that you've worked on. So our audience would love to get to know you better. Could you tell us a little bit about growing up in Anchorage, Alaska, and your childhood?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Anchorage. And as my mom likes to say, my mom is born and raised in Sparta, Greece. So she was kind of plucked from the Mediterranean and taken to the end of the earth, as she calls it, to Alaska. And I have two brothers. We grew up there. Much of our summers were spent outdoors. We camped, we hiked, we spent all of our off of school time in nature. We have a great appreciation for it. And I think a big part of it, we used to fight with our parents that school would let out and the TVs and the cable boxes would be unplugged. We weren't allowed to stay inside in the summer at all. So whether we were actually leaving town, and, leaving town means 15 minutes outside of town, you're in completely untouched, undisturbed nature, or fishing in our backyard, we just spent all of our time outdoors. And the summer in Alaska is gorgeous. It's sunny all the time and the sun doesn't set. So it's always light, as opposed to contrast of the winter. But yeah, it was a great place to grow up, family environment. We were all very athletic and musically exposed to different types of disciplines. And I think it shaped both of my brothers and I very much in how we've proceeded and advanced in our careers.
Okay. And so did you live there your entire childhood until you went to college, or?
Yep. I graduated high school at 17 and I left for college, and I've gone back on occasion to visit, but I haven't lived in the States since I was 17.
Okay. Wow.
I've been on the East Coast since, 15, 20 years now.
I do remember we went there. I went on an Alaskan cruise way back with my family. And I remember it was a summertime thing.
Yeah.
So, and it was light the entire day.
Yeah.
I think it only got dark for like 2 or 3 hours at night, which is crazy. But I always remember, even as a kid, thinking, "Wow, this has to really, really be bad in the
winter." Yeah, you pay the price. There's a balance there. But no, my husband and I got married on summer solstice, which we had a sign, the bar closes when the sun sets, so we were just up all night. It was great.
That's great. So what did you do as a kid growing up, in terms of, were there any hints of wanting to be an architect or an engineer?
Yes and no. I mean, I think if you ask my mom, she saved something from probably 3rd or 4th grade of a stained glass window. Our school had a competition for all the students, and I had drawn something. I don't think I was so artistically inclined, but I was always very deep in thought about, conceptual and purpose and meaning in our built world. So it was always a thought to go into architecture, and it wasn't necessarily a sure thing. My grandfather was a civil engineer. I always had that in my mind as kind of a practical balance. But I think ultimately the richness in culture and history and the way that architecture reflects, society's values in the built world, spoke to me much more.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And so I like to ask this of people in the design, world. Can you describe your childhood home in detail? Like, do you remember
Absolutely.
it? Okay.
I could try it. I don't know how accurate it'd be, but I could definitely try it. We went through a home renovation when I was, I think, probably in middle school. So it was a kitchen renovation, but I remember kind of the receiving end, my mom as the client, kind of what the talk was at the dinner table while we were going through it, and some of the struggles, and thinking, what a great thing to be able to come in and upgrade someone's home and leave them feeling so much happier about whatever their dwelling is. And now I didn't go into residential architecture, but I have that feeling about anything that I get the opportunity to touch and shape in the realm of design. Which
is funny. So that's part of the reason why I asked that question. That's how I got into architecture, was my mom was renovating our house all the time, and I was always fascinated by that. But agreed, I'd never wanted to do any sort of single family residential. It seemed like a horrible existence for an architect. But so you describe yourself as someone with deep-rooted appreciation for nature and mankind's ability to design, build, and create resilient infrastructure in some of the world's toughest conditions. I love that. Can you explain that some more?
Sure. So I think one of the things the first time we'll sit down and talk about a project in terms of resiliency, there's always this confusion or maybe lack of understanding of how resiliency differs from sustainability. And they have sort of an inverse relationship. So one of the first things I'll say is, in terms of sustainability really looks at the built world's impact on the environment, and what materials are we choosing? How sustainable are they? Or, future generations, are we stripping the earth of those resources, or are we designing and executing in a sustainable way? Now, the inverse of that, looking at resiliency, is what is nature's impact on the built world, and how can we design for that? So we're in this moment where, sea level rise and climate change, and there are all these kind of trending facets that we need to focus on. And when we build, I know you have a focus on, the client relationship with the architect. And I struggle with that myself, because when we design, I'm not necessarily designing for the client. I'm often designing, public infrastructure for the end user, and not even for the end user of today, but, future generations. So I think the ability to look forward in the timeline of what the design timeline is, what the construction timeline is, and what the design life is intended to be, you must design with a resilient mindset. Okay. We can't predict what future weather patterns will be, except that we're finding them to be more of a challenge and more of an obstacle than they have been previously. Mm-hmm. So having that seed planted early on in the design process is so important, and it becomes abundantly clear when it's not at the core of design and the vulnerabilities are exposed.
So picking up on resilience, it's a word that's thrown around a lot. Mm-hmm. I hear it in not only obviously what we do as professionals in the design and construction world, but I hear it now in our kids' school, right? Mm-hmm. It's a value that they want to instill in education, right? Resilience in humans. So in light of the pandemic, mm-hmm. How has resilience sort of even evolved for you?
I've reflected on that a lot this past year, because I think everyone has been forced to. No one could have predicted what 2020 and 2021 has brought, in terms of just even, daily habits being shifted and almost forced to adapt. And that's at the core of it is the willingness to be flexible and not rigid in your approach to everything, really, because things happen that are out of our control. And if you're rigid and you can't adapt, that's when, sheer stresses and breaks and tears happen. You have to be able to kind of roll with it, and find other ways to achieve the same goals.
Okay. So is that it changed in your business, the idea since the pandemic of resilience?
Yeah. And I think we set ourselves up well in the respect that I've worked at other firms previously that, and I respect and I'm grateful for my previous experiences, but a lot of them were founded much earlier where the shift with technology hadn't really been optimized. And many, it was a question of what is a VPN or how can I get the email on my phone, or I'm willing to work off hours, but I need access to these things. And I felt like I was hitting my head a lot, trying to do that in other environments. And so one of the things that we did from day one was to make a, remote accessible environment and to shape our week and our daily, weekly, monthly meetings in a way that whether or not we were in a room together or on job sites all over New York or however we were spread out, we were able to keep a beat and stay on it as we move forward.
Right. So you're in Anchorage, you're 17, it's time to go to college. How'd you choose New Jersey?
I didn't. So I got distracted for a beat and talk about resilience and adaptation. I had it in my head to be an architect, but I was also a little clouded by, I was a Division I athlete and I was being recruited by several different schools. And on the one hand, I didn't really understand the importance of the 5-year program in terms of architecture licensure. And I ended up going kind of mesmerized with University of Connecticut soccer program. And I went as an athlete to play, and it was a phenomenal experience, but it didn't set in until really the end of the first semester. And I was taking kind of general undergraduate courses that weren't resonating with me. They were general business courses, whatever they were. And so I pivoted second semester, and I kind of made a deal with myself that I'm going to take anything that in any way, shape, or form relates to architecture and see if I feel that much more alive in my studies, because it just felt dull my first semester. And so I did that, and I took art history and different courses that in some way related to architecture. And I kind of knew midway through the semester that I needed to transfer. There wasn't an architecture program. I wish I would have looked a little bit more into landscape architecture because they did have that program, but I started talking to different schools and coaches also to be able to transfer in and play. And NJIT ended up being a good fit in that they were transitioning from a Division II program to Division I. And I had, Big East Division I experience that I could bring to the team and help that transition, as well as a phenomenal school of architecture.
Wow, that's awesome. So you played D1 soccer?
Yes.
Wow. Congratulations. So how long did that go your entire career?
Yeah. So I played all 4 years of the athletic career that you're allowed to with NCAA. And I didn't redshirt. Thankfully, I wasn't injured. I had no reason to, but I did continue my 5th year in architecture and my master's as a student coach within the program.
Wow. That's really cool. That must have been an amazing experience.
It was. And I kind of, when I look back at it, I think I'm a type of person that the busier I am, almost the happier I am, the more productive I am, the more fulfilled I am. And so I look back at college, and I think at one point I was working and I'll count soccer as a job, but I was working 4 or 5 different jobs. And it wasn't for the money. It was because that shift in headspace and mindset, I think really benefits and informs everything. So even, studio time, if I would plan my weeks and I would go to soccer practice early in the morning, and I never pulled an all-nighter. I think if you ask anyone in my class, I was probably the only person that ever pulled an all-nighter, and it comes with this, OCD level of planning my time.
Yeah.
And so I would do that. And I think it helped me keep a structured and focused schedule throughout college, to do well in architecture and also do well on the field.
So all this now makes more sense that you were a student athlete, and especially just sort of, having done the research and the evolution of your career, mm-hmm. I feel like you've done an awful lot in a short period, right? And seeing as that you were an athlete and the way that you work through that, I look at my own daughter as an athlete in gymnastics, and the way that she, even at a young age, I mean, she's only 12, but the way she's able to, compartmentalize kind of schoolwork has to be done by this time so that I have this at practice so that I can do this here. And then even scheduling free time in a sense, it's pretty amazing. And you can accomplish a lot if you do it that way. But I was an architecture student that never did an overnighter either.
We're the two.
Yeah. I was, I don't know. I also kept a lot of my friends outside of architecture school. Like a lot of them like to just kind of, to me, they always, they wasted a lot of time.
Yes.
They didn't focus on actually getting the work done.
Totally empathize.
Oh, that's hilarious. So you start your career with the Conti Group as an engineer. Oh wait, actually, I want to go back. So you have an architecture degree. Now you go for civil engineering.
Yes. So I think from that mentality of an athlete and the discipline of an athlete, I think I learned early on that whatever your natural strengths are and your God-given talents are, they're great. And that's, one side to look at. But the other side is what are your shortcomings? What are your weaknesses? What do you need to work on? And I had that always kind of rooted in my head from soccer. I was naturally right-footed, but what would limit me was my left foot. So I had to focus on training my left foot to be maybe not as good as my right foot, but to tighten that gap for me as a, well-rounded athlete to be able to perform still with my left foot when needed. And I think that kind of mentality manifested itself in my academic career as well. When I was finishing up architecture school, I did very well, and I received, design awards my first year and whatnot. And that felt good, but I was finishing my program and I just had this self-conscious kind of vulnerability that I had identified that I didn't have a good enough technical understanding, which no one does when they finish architecture school. But I was really focused on, all right, if I'm going to do well in my career, I need to beef up on my technical chops. So I did, and I did that by going, I think it was before I even finished architecture school. So in my last year, my 5th year, I started taking master's courses for civil engineering, and there were a lot of bridge courses that I had to, fill the gap with difference in kind of undergraduate requirements. And I did that. And the same thing happened again when I finished civil engineering and I got my degree. It was, great. I can do all these calculations on paper, but I didn't have the practical knowledge to know how to apply that technical knowledge. And so I looked for my first role to be in the field. It was also right at the turn of, 2007, 8, 9, when the economy was plummeting. And I thought, all right, I can go and be a CAD jockey in a studio for a couple of years, or I can go into the field and get some, hands-on experience and understand design is very much a process. And if you're not engaging construction and how things are built in that process, there's a disconnect and it shows. So that was really important for me to understand in the field, why are we, well, first in the design office, why are we picking a certain material? And in the field, how are we putting it together, and who are the people putting it together, and what are their questions, and what are their criticisms of the designers when they're doing this? And I kind of backpedaled to be able to understand that state of kind of those thoughts to inform my design. And my first job ended up being as a field engineer and then project engineer with Conti. And same thing, I leaned into any weakness or any shortcoming to be able to, in my mind, increase the trajectory of when I do come full circle back to design.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a number of years, and same thing. Anytime I felt a weakness, I kind of leaned into it, and I'll liken it to now I'm coming back to the design world. But again, as an athlete, if you've ever trained with like 1 or 2 pound weights on your legs and even just walked around all day, you know that as soon as you take them off, you just feel light and free and you fast and you can do anything. And that was kind of my mentality early in my career of, all right, it doesn't come naturally to me. I haven't been exposed to it. Let me give myself a chance to learn about it and apply it. And I might not be the best. It may turn into my strength. It may not, but it's certainly going to help me increase when I do focus on design. It'll inform a lot of those decisions, and the questions will come naturally. And the contacts, also the connections within the industry to be able to pick up the phone and call a heavy civil contractor and say, hey, this is my condition. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And right there, you've saved the client time, money.
Yeah.
Just overall, you're a better designer for it.
That is impressive. So I like this idea that you're comfortable in one thing, but you forced yourself to be uncomfortable in a sense and learn something outside of that, which which is impressive. And so I guess you're, now you're, do you think, I'm trying to rethink about how I would ask this. Do you think it's something where, back in the day to become an architect, you had to have an apprenticeship, right? You actually had to go into the field and work. Do you think we'd be better off having that these days? Is that kind of what you did for yourself in a sense?
Yeah, in many ways. I mean, if we go back to the Renaissance where it was the artists and the craftsmen were, one and the same or working very closely. There wasn't, a design, bid, build process. It was very much design, build, just inherently by nature that you would, check in on the progress and tweak. And a lot of the times it was beautifully designed from day one, but a lot more of the times it was changed as you went along. And so I feel like our process and our project delivery methods have hindered and become an impediment to the end result success. And we've compartmentalized so much of the design process and the building process and the bidding, and all of that kind of muddies the water in terms of a talented architect's ability to execute.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, someone we have on staff here at Mancini Duffy is actually worked at a contractor. We brought him in for a large project that we're doing. And what I loved about him was he always would say, hey, I look at the drawings like a contractor looks at the drawings, and so we go back and he'll tell you, you can't put that on a drawing. You can't show it that way. The contractor's going to laugh at you. I had an experience very early on in my career where I was sort of catapulted into a design position. I had designed this building and it had this crazy stair. And I remember the contractor saying to me, how am I supposed to build this stair? You only gave like 1 inch on one side past, this 3-story wall. Yeah. How am I supposed to, physically get in there? And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm dead. They're going to fire me. and he did come back and say, luckily for you, I figured out a way of doing it. Yeah. I'm going to do it through the actual wall and kind of work backwards. So it all kind of worked out.
But now I'm sure every time you put pen to paper or draft or whatever, that's the question you're asking yourself is how can this be built? Exactly. How will it be built? And with that informing the design process, you're benefiting everyone along the way, all the stakeholders, the client, everyone.
Exactly. So as I said, you started with the Conti Group as an engineer and you started on the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. Mm-hmm. Can you take us through that part, of your early career?
Sure. So I was fresh out of school. It was a master's program, but it was still, very green in terms of exposure in the industry. And I remember, my first couple months, it was just acronym soup. I couldn't keep anything straight. I was like making my own cheat sheets of what all these things meant. And to compound it, I had a project manager who I still keep in touch with to this day, but he was off the boat from Ireland and I couldn't understand a word he was saying, even if it was words that I knew, let alone acronyms that I didn't. So it was a challenging period, but kind of grew through it, got my feet under me. And I spent a year and a half on that project. And in many ways, my design background came to be a strength within the team because it was a design build contract and I worked for the contractor, but I was the appointed liaison between the design engineers and the contracting team. So whatever the constructability questions were, I was presenting to the design team, and with some empathy, but very junior in my career. But it was a perfect moment for me to be situated in that I was advocating for the constructability means and methods, but also absorbing what the designers had in their mind when they designed it.
Right. Absolutely. And this was Staten Island Ferry?
This was Staten Island Ferry Terminal, okay. Yeah.
So now was that the building itself or also the infrastructure?
That was the infrastructure. It was, I think, seven or 8 bridges leading to, and several other, stormwater improvements, drainage improvements. A new bridge was erected. It was enough to get exposure into, heavy civil construction.
Right. And then where did you go after Conti Group?
That was really my first job with Conti, and I ended up being there, I think, 5 years. And so at 18 months, I raised my hand and said, hey, I felt a little bit kind of stagnant in what I was absorbing at that point. Like, all right, I've got my legs under me. I'm comfortable doing what I'm doing. I'm performing well. I'm getting good reviews, but what else? Right. So I, diplomatically raised my hand and said, hey, if there's something else out there for me, I'd, be eager to learn. And I was brought into a leadership development program, which allowed me to rotate through the different departments within the company. And that was, to this day, one of the most valuable experiences I've had in my career, in that again, with empathy, I understood, why the accountants were on the field engineers to get everything entered, and why the marketing proposal teams needed our resumes to be updated. And there was just this moment of clarity in all regards throughout the different departments of, oh, this is why they ask, or this is why it needs to be done that way. And it's a lot of that. And so I spent a couple years rotating through different departments, and I had expressed interest in working overseas. And so one of the things that came up, I was actually all ready to go work on a drainage job in Ghana, in Africa. I had all my immunizations and shots. And just literally the week before I was supposed to go, one of my rotations was in the estimating department, and one of the jobs that we had estimated on won, and it was a job in Israel. And because I was one of the people that estimated the job and was familiar with the scope and the program, I agreed to, pivot and go to Israel instead. And I spent about a year there, grew tremendously in my career and personally. I think travel does that for anyone and everyone. Yeah. And when I came back, I similarly rotated and had some exposure into, again, some marine engineering and master planning for ports. And it came time, it was right around the time I was getting married. I had accrued a lot of time off. So we said, take a step back, let's get married, let's take some time. And did that, ended up completely removing myself from the industry and helping my husband with his business for about 18 months before I then joined McLaren.
What business is that?
Le Gourmet Factory. It's a kitchen incubator and cooking school that I ran the cooking school side of it. So, again, with the rotations that I had done through, the Conti group in the different, the leadership program, business is business. So it was a lot of the same principles I was able to apply, even though it was a completely different line of business. But understanding, cash is king, cash flow, just certain things, being able to apply lessons learned from completely different industry. But again, it's business.
Right.
And under, just my husband's and my oversight to be able to execute on.
Right. Wow. That's great. And so after that, where did you go?
So after that, we physically moved, into Rockland County, into New York, and I was driving and I saw a big sign, McLaren Engineering Group. And I thought, oh, that's really close to home. Let me see, what do they do? And I stumbled across I think it was a marine engineer posting, and I didn't exactly fit the criteria. I wasn't, I don't have a PE, but I had plenty of experience on Staten Island Ferry Terminal and this port planning job in the Black Sea. And I applied and I met Shay Thorvaldson, who is the department director and now my business partner. And I took the job and spent about a year there and was primarily focused on New York City's citywide ferry program at that time.
That's great. Yeah. And so then you depart and you go in 2017, you're hired as a director of project management and business development at DCAK MSA Architecture and Engineering. So you're now kind of going back, and I'm intrigued by the business development part of that. So you're now going back into architecture. Yeah.
So to this point, all of my experience was in construction and engineering, none in architecture. And I didn't even know at that time whether or not I wanted to be licensed. But again, with considering any shortcomings, I did see not being licensed neither in engineering or in architecture as somewhat of a limitation to my trajectory. So I thought, all right, let me lean into my come full circle. That's what I've said I was going to do. Let me get back into architecture and design and work under a licensed architecture and practice design. So that was the impetus for that. And I spent about a year there, and the focus, their firm focused more on completely different industry, ecclesiastical architecture, which as far as industry growth, there isn't much. I mean, a lot of churches are being repurposed to different programs, but it was very valuable in that, again, an older firm that had a different approach to business as opposed to a lot of, tech startup firm cultures. And I will say even experiences where you might not love going to work every day, there's value in those lessons, even if it's, I know I don't want to do that.
Right.
And you can turn away from it and go in the right direction.
Right.
And so I had a bit of that. And there were days where I was, challenging myself to stay vested in what I was working on day to day. But the bigger picture was, I need to learn about architecture. I want to become an architect that practices architecture. I need to work under an architect. And so that was about a year there. And I got in touch with Shay at one point and asked him, what he was doing, because when I left McLaren, I left I say on good terms, I think. But I had a conversation with him, and I was very transparent about everything before I left, saying, hey, I have this offer. What would you do in my shoes? And that's a hard thing to ask a boss, because he has, split motivations. But he said, when I made my decision, he said, if I ever go off on my own again, you're going to be my first call. And I thought, yeah, okay, at that level, he's a couple levels ahead of me and 10 more years senior in his career. And I thought, okay, sure. But a year later, when I was kind of thinking about, all right, I'm getting my architecture chops, like what next? I reached out to him and he said, yeah, let's do this.
And so that's when you start Indigo River.
Indigo River and TMS Waterfront. So we have two firms, and we share labor. And it's kind of backed ourselves into being able to offer WBE services and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, which we do a lot of public work. So having those is a help. Okay.
So can you kind of tell us a little bit about each of those companies and sort of what are the services that are offered and, how it's structured?
Yeah. So we have 9 people, and our backgrounds all have complementary skill sets, but are all different as well. So I have, background in architecture and engineering. Shay has a background in civil engineering and marine contracting. He ran a contracting business for a bit. We have a naval architect, an environmental engineer, a structural engineer, a planner. So we have a lot of different strengths within our team that all complement in that we focus on the waterfront. So we'll get involved. We're not designers of record by any means, but we get involved as early as we can. Oftentimes it's too late, but we focus on the waterfront. So from project inception, concept and schematic design through the regulatory permitting process, which is a lot for the waterfront. You deal with a lot of different agencies that all claim, they claim the same jurisdiction, but with competing motivations. So it's a lot to juggle. And then through to constructability, cost estimating, logistics, sequencing, because on the waterfront, that's, very key elements of what you're designing and how it's getting built.
Why do you think your career has gone to the waterfront?
It was a theme just early on in that I was placed on the Staten Island ferry terminal. I wasn't looking for it by any means. And then I had, deep sea port planning as well that kind of was laced in there. And again, with McLaren, I had all these opportunities for exposure that I leaned into, that I had some basis to build upon. And so I didn't go out looking to be, waterfront architect or resiliency specialist, but it was just experience, like building on the experiences that I had exposure to. Right.
That makes sense. Makes sense. And is it waterfront opportunities kind of anywhere in the world or in the US, or so it's kind of global?
Yeah. And what I love about it, because I've obviously reflected a lot more on it since it's, one, anytime you go to site, you're on the water. You can't really argue with that. It's awesome. But, two, it's a really dynamic moment where nature is meeting man-made, and that's that zone. And here, we have an estuary environment where there's high tide, low tide. There are a couple different, ecosystems that we're always taking into consideration, and habitat restoration. There are a lot of different themes that play within this zone of where water meets land, where nature meets man-made. And so it's, as I said, dynamic. And there's so much potential to focus in on that edge condition. And it's not always, a bulkhead or riprap. There's so many other creative ways to approach design and construction on the water.
Right. And so if I'm a developer and I have a property on the waterfront, am I calling you first? What is that process?
So we've gotten involved in projects where it's kind of one of those things where everyone's curious. I like to go outside of my comfort zone, but it's also important to kind of know your lane, especially when you're spending a client's money. So like if I was asked to design a hospital, I have no purpose design. Sure, I would find it fascinating, interesting, but there are so many others that are more qualified to do that. And so with the waterfront, I feel like it's not always considered early on enough in the process what it means to be designing and building in this zone where just the regulatory environment alone is greater than any other, especially in New York City, is greater than any other site condition that you'll find. So early on from concept and schematic design, just being able to understand what the ramifications and repercussions are of early broad strokes decision making and how they play out down the road, because it's a long process too to get permitted on anything. So if you can be strategic in the early phases of how are we designing this and why, and what are the impacts and how are we mitigating those impacts, those conversations, the earlier they take place, the more streamlined the process will be for the entire project.
Yeah, so the client really should call you first. And I'll tell you why, because probably there's, in 25 years, I've probably worked on or had the opportunity to work on projects on a waterfront somewhere. Mm-hmm. And every single time I would tell you that the client always came in saying that they had everything that they need, they were approved, mm-hmm. they were ready to go. And not a single one of those ever happened. So, and actually, it's funny that we were talking about this because this came up recently with a potential other project that I was told, no, everything's in place. So when everything's in place, it gets me a little nervous. So.
Yeah, no, it's, and like I said, we're not looking to be designers or designers of record, but the earlier on we can inform that design process, the better off the end result of the project will be. So we team with architects and design engineers of record, and help shape and steer and direct the conversation and ask the right questions so that we don't get too far along before we have to backpedal. So
for in the New York, New Jersey area, did Hurricane Sandy, or whatever they call it, Superstorm Sandy, did it really affect change? Because I don't know. I feel like it did initially, and now I just see a lot of waterfront development happening where it's just essentially raised up a little bit, and it's not raised up enough. Yeah. If that's really what you're looking to accomplish. But from your opinion, did it change anything?
It did certainly sparked an awareness. And that's manifested itself in a couple of different ways. But with regulators especially, there is this hypersensitivity to what are you doing? And there's a floodplain management system, and there's a resiliency, being able to apply New York City Building Code Appendix G to whatever waterfront site you have that you're prone to be inundated. How are you planning for that? And not planning to just replace everything, which ends up being so much more costly over the life cycle of the project. If you can apply those themes earlier on, and the city has done a really great job rolling out some of these programs and information around them. So it definitely did spark change fast enough. Nothing moves fast in our industry.
So explain to me what a transdisciplinary design studio focused on creating solutions that have a positive impact on tomorrow's world means to you. And transdisciplinary specifically.
All right. So transdisciplinary is easy in that any table that I'm at, I'm wearing multiple hats of field engineer, project engineer, contractor, design engineer, designer, architect, landscape architect. There's so many different hats that I can wear depending on what table I'm sitting at and with whom. And I think a lot of it comes down to what's lacking in the room and filling that void. So if we have, strong designers that they're asking the right questions for designers, I'll counter with the questions for the contractors. Or the questions for the client. And a lot of times we represent, or, client representatives that will go in and represent the owner and say, highest and best use isn't this. And we'll be able to have the conversation for the betterment of the project as a whole, not necessarily any one party, but understanding all of the different pieces that have to come together to create a successful project. The first part of that, you asked, better world for tomorrow. What does that mean? I think in many ways early in my career, I was fidgeting or I felt stifled in that what I was looking for from a company I wasn't finding. And so one of the pieces in launching Indigo River was creating what I couldn't find for myself and creating an environment where I could grow faster than I could grow anywhere else previously, and creating that environment and fostering and nurturing others who are like-minded in that they're ambitious, they take initiative, they're resourceful. We have a kind of another business that's an incubator that our goal is that anyone we bring in, if you love engineering and you love environmental engineering and you want to launch a firm for environmental engineering, by all means, we'll incubate you. Our goal is that you won't want to go off on your own. You'll want to stay with us. Yeah. And that we'll add it to our service offerings, and we'll nurture and create, incubate an environment where all of these different disciplines can thrive. And
how are you doing that? Are you raising money for that, or are you self-funding it?
Self-funding.
Okay.
Through, our first couple projects that we took on were on a retainer basis, and that allowed us to get our feet under us and grow.
Okay.
With kind of minimal risk. We had, our first year we had 4 people, our second year we had 9 people, and then the pandemic hit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'm most grateful is we do a kind of state of the companies every year on the anniversary. And at the end of our second year, we solicited feedback from everyone. What do you think we're doing well? Where can we improve? It's company for everyone. And one of the things that was voiced was that we were almost growing too fast and we didn't have the right, standards and processes and procedures in place. And so we were looking at, all these opportunities that were available to us, and it's a great position to be in, but it really made us focus in on, all right, which are the right opportunities for us, and how are we growing people into roles before we grow the company more. And that happened right before the pandemic, and we said no to a couple opportunities, and we held off on hiring people, and then the pandemic hit, which of course we were very grateful at that point that we hadn't just expanded. And again, this year we had our state of the companies, and some of the feedback was on how we handled the pandemic. And I think it comes down to trust with employees. If you're looking for a business just to have profits, maybe you'll do that. Maybe you'll be successful. But for us, we're very in tune with profits. I think it's triple business line. It's the economic principle of profits, people, and planet.
Okay.
So we're very much in tune with people, and that means not only our people, but the client, the end users, the stakeholders, the contractors, everyone kind of in the process of design and construction, and the planet. Like, what are we doing? Are we leaving it better than we found it? There are future generations that need this earth too, and we can't be selfish in what we're designing for our 20 or 50 year design life.
Right. And so do you have a goal in terms of how large you want to be? Or is it just you're going to...
Early on, I thought I did. And I had a conversation, and I was kind of, slapped on the wrist of, why are you limiting yourself? Why are you setting any goal? Like, see where it takes you, have your North Star, go toward it, but, do it responsibly. So haven't set a limit on it.
I agree. Same thing here at Mancini. We had initially we wanted to be, X number of people by X number of date. And the reality is we actually did grow a little too fast, and we peeled back because we wanted it to feel very much like you. We wanted it to be a family, right? Yeah. We wanted to understand and know, kind of truly know and value every single person that's here at the firm. And you can't do that when it gets bigger and bigger. Yeah. And the reality is, just like you can do major jobs with 10 people, and we can do major jobs with, the amount of people we have here. You don't really need a thousands of people and it also affords you the opportunity to be more selective in what scope you take and make sure that it's aligned with what your values are and where you are getting that gratification and satisfaction out of your work. Yeah. And I want you to talk a little bit about the mission of Indigo River. And one of the things that struck me was I recently read The Code Breaker by Walter Isaacson. I don't know if you know that book. Mm-hmm. It's about the scientist Jennifer Doudna. Mm-hmm. The gene mapping tool that led to the mRNA vaccines. Mm-hmm. And in the book, he argues that the past half century has been about the digital age based on the microchip, the computer, the internet. But now we're entering this sort of life sciences revolution where people that, kids that studied digital coding will also be studying, the coding of life. And what I thought, it kind of reminded me as I was reading, different things that what Indigo River is about. Mm-hmm. It's similar to what you call sort of the fourth industrial revolution. Yes. So tell us a little bit about that.
Could have a whole segment just on that.
Cool.
I think it boils down just simply to 2 things. Whatever you work on, or whoever you encounter, whatever you do each day, if you can leave it better than you found it, we'll all be a lot better off. And that applies across, any industry. But specifically within design and within design at the water's edge, there's so much that's vulnerable and so much that it's important to be sensitive to, that the more that we can have these conversations about what are our decisions today doing, 5 years from now, 10 years, 50 years, 500 years, the more we can think at that scale, the better off our designs today will be. And the better off they'll serve the communities in the future. And not only the communities, the second part, what I was going to say is, as architects, we have this credo almost that when you get licensed, you're not getting licensed to design. You're getting licensed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Yeah.
I would argue that it should be the public and the planet, but in any case, even if you zero in on, okay, health and safety many times is kind of shaped by what we have in regulation and in building code. But if you really zero in on what is welfare of people, what does that mean to be responsible to protect the welfare of people? And there's no time limit. It's not welfare of the client that's paying for the project or welfare of the end user the day the red ribbon is cut. It's welfare of people. And when we think about society and we think about the timeline of how long we've been on Earth and what our lifespan is within that, we have to think of the welfare of our kids and their kids and their kids and future generations. And so with every design decision, if we can be thinking, leave it better than you found it and protecting the welfare of people, that to me, whatever means we have to accomplish that, that's what it all rolls up to.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so being a mission, based company, how do you go about acquiring clients that are in line with that mission? Specifically because you're focused on a certain, the water's edge, that kind of thing. What's that process like for you?
So we have a good portfolio of public and private work. And I think that in itself is really important to be diversified because on the one hand, again, we could have a whole session on how architects value themselves within the industry. I think the hourly model is completely outdated and does not do any architect justice.
That is definitely a theme here on this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, it should be so much more of a value proposition. I wish we could completely turn it on its head and almost like take equity in our clients' projects and work on that. Because then I feel the investment that would take place is that it's an investment. It's not a transaction of, all right, you did 1 hour of work, you get this much money. It's what are you building? What are you creating? And what does that mean? What is its purpose? And there are bigger questions that when we take, yes, we all need profits. We all need money to make the wheel go round. But if we can begin to think of other ways that we're adding value that they're not quantitative. They're a little bit more abstract. They're a little bit more subjective. But if we're understanding what's going on in the world around us in terms of climate change, sea level rise, all these things, and we can let those inform our decisions to help drive everything we do, we're going to be better off.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the architecture profession. There are so many wonderful people, so many interesting, innovative, and smart folks. And we get access to people that most never even have an opportunity to meet in person. I have worked with Bob Iger, CEO of Disney, Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, John Foley, founder of Peloton, and many more legends. There is another aspect of architects that fascinates me. How do clients view us? How do they work with us? Those that work with architects either have a wonderful experience or a pretty bad one. Let's continue to listen to the lessons they've learned. And now back to the episode. So part of what we do here is take a critical look at how architects work with their clients and the process of how we deliver projects. You have a unique perspective, obviously, having kind of the architect and engineering side and the larger public works, the international work, being an entrepreneur. In your opinion, what do architects do well and what do they do wrong?
Good architects listen, and they listen not only to the client, but to the community, to the larger themes of societal trends. And what do they do wrong? They have an ego sometimes. They impose architecture, design prowess that is great, but if it's not connected to the needs of a community and it's not sustainable and it's not resilient, it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. That very well said. Very, very well said. So we talked a little bit about the actual business model for architects and engineers. I mean, it basically is, I work an hour, I get paid X amount of dollars. Or in, like an interiors project that's per square foot, you get paid a certain, dollar, whatever per square foot, and it becomes commoditized. One thing you mentioned before was sort of taking a stake in somebody's, outcome of their business, right, as a result. What are some other ideas that you have kind of kicking around in terms of the process of or the business model behind the way an architect and engineer gets paid?
I think there's a lot to be learned from industrial engineering, and to be able to apply those principles to architecture. If you can design something for a client in such a way that they didn't even know they were missing it, but you can streamline their business to run much more efficiently, you should get a stake of that. And that should always be your motivation, is what's really best for the client, not always what they're asking for, but what is the best outcome for this project, for this site, for this program. And sometimes I hate that I think the AIA based contract is generally the client comes to you with the site and with the program. I think site selection is so important, and the architect should be involved from day one. And I think programming is also, I cringe sometimes when we get a program from someone and I think this is a lost opportunity for this site. It's so many other things that we could do with the site, but the program is already kind of defined in a way that's restrictive. So the earlier on the architect can get involved in the process and truly as a partner with the developer. It's harder on public jobs, and I understand when agencies are spending tax dollars, you want to do something that's tried and true. You want to know the end result, but that's in many ways why we have a diversified portfolio, that we can work with private clients and private developers that are a little bit more open to trying something outside of the box, and then hopefully modeling it for the public to then piggyback off of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you have an interesting perspective in terms of being an architect and an engineer. How do you think architects and engineers can better communicate?
So some of it I think is really simple.
Actually, just pick up the phone.
Yeah. Well, yes, and also
because there's always seems to be
there's a friction and there's a disconnect. And I wish that architects and engineers worked more closely throughout the entire process. I wish it wasn't two different industries and two different, like any firm that can have architecture and engineering within the same umbrella. And those designers are actually sitting down and working through in real time what the constraints are together, the better off the project will be for it. So it's something that even as simple as like working hours, we start our days early, and we start them early because we've all worked in the field and we know that the contractors are on site and they have questions already at 7 a.m. And if you're getting into the office at 10 and, catching up on emails and go to lunch
at 7 a.m. for sure.
But that's the thing. I remember being in the field and there were always jokes about, the designers won't even get to the office till 10, like don't even bother calling. And to me, that was like, we're a team. We're all both vested in the execution of how this project comes out, and just the working hours, not that it couldn't be overcome, but we like to make ourselves available to the contractors who are in the field executing. And we're not a culture of, 12-hour days. We're almost all the time, everyone's logged off by 5. We start early, but we're not dragging it out. We're getting our work done and checking out. And I think that even just calibrating hours or working times, setting standing meetings, cancel them if you have nothing to talk about, but set a standing meeting on every project with the design team that you can check in on, by the way, and then it's coming up. So whatever your short list of questions are, you have a banked time for that conversation, not, oh shoot, it's past, it's too late, I'm, sending emails, we're missing each other. It's just, project management 101, communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly now with, the fact that you can do video meetings, it should be a lot easier to do. And it's funny, I was thinking about as you were talking about that process of the designers, kind of staying up all night. It goes right back to the studio environment, right? It really is just this, it's drilled into the architect and design student to just, the longer you work, the later you work, the better you are at it, which is just, it's a bizarre,
and it's not fair to the client too, to be spending hours endlessly. Like there's the responsibility that comes with understanding what the forecasted hours should be for a certain task. And it's a really hard thing to do, to pivot between, task oriented and then creative design. But I feel like the more that every person can transition between those spaces, the more respect you have for both.
Right. Absolutely. At Indigo River, you say that you're inspired by overlapping design, technology, and nature. So what opportunities do you see for technology to help the process? One
of the things with technology, I feel like kids coming out of school today have so much more technical prowess, and there's just this imbalance with especially older firms that have, a more kind of predictable career path and raise and title structure. And there's this imbalance of, there is industry experience and that is valuable, but there is also new technology that can make so much more efficient everything done in the office. And to not value those both, not necessarily equal, but to not have those collaborative sessions to be able to get both of those strengths on the same project, to me, again, it's a lost opportunity. And so I think kids coming out of school that have this technological prowess, it's hard to change a firm culture if they're not embracing technology. I think if I wasn't running a firm, I would be looking for a firm like Mancini Duffy that has embraced technology to the betterment of the industry. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do because it can be prohibitively cost expensive, but that's the thing, that when it becomes available to start using day to day, the industry is better for it. And not only the industry, I mean, we're the industry that's quite literally shaping the built world, so the world becomes better for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree here. Same thing. I mean, it's the idea is we invested early on in the technology, but the benefits from that have been not just kind of where we started with the ideas, but the people that we've attracted that now have a whole new set of ideas. Yeah. And as like I use my kids as an example, they do things on their iPad that's so second nature to them. I mean, there's a program where they take photographs and then they use their pen and they cut out the people. Somehow it's unbelievable. That used to take me hours in Photoshop to do.
To not embrace and harness that to me is like, why are we doing things the way we did them in the 50s? It makes zero. Why are we going to 2D only to go to 3D to 4D? Like, why?
Yep. And when someone comes here and says, hey, there's a new piece of software, I think we should get it. I say, absolutely. Let's get it. Let's see what it can bring to the table. We have a guy here who's obsessed about bringing a robot into our design lab. Still not sure why we need a robot, but he's passionate about it. So I'm sure if we get a robot, we'll figure out what to do with it. So
awesome. Love it.
So we have a responsibility as designers to face climate change. We can lead the effort. Do you think truly that architects and engineers are up for this task? Or is this more like a lead thing where you're checking boxes and you're just sort of going through the motions? Or do you think we've reached a point where there really is going to be meaningful change and that we can lead it?
If we're going to be successful, there has to be. It cannot be a secondary set of guidelines or principles. It has to be ingrained. I mean, I love that LEED's or U.S. Green Building Council's mission is to be obsolete within, originally, I think it was 10 years. That's framing it so that there's no checklist anymore. It's inherent in the design project or design process. And to me, that is the responsible thing. And we should all be embracing that. And it shouldn't be, a secondary set of boxes to check. It should be ingrained in our day to day of how we think about the built world too, that there's a carbon footprint for every decision that we're making. And to be connected to what that means is an important responsibility. And if architects and engineers aren't going to do it, who will? Yeah. It can't be a secondary layer of principles layered on top of a design. It has to be ingrained in the design.
Yeah, and I think the way I see, again, sort of the younger students coming out of school, the younger generations, they are brought up with this. And so they really do want to see meaningful change. It isn't an added thing that we're going to go on as a bonus or sort of a sub note to, now we have a plaque on our building.
Yeah, I'm not knocking the credentials of it. I think it's
a starting
so
point.
important, but it's a jumping off point, and it's just the scratching the surface of really how we need to wrap into each of our practices those principles.
Yeah. So, well, my last question is kind of bringing it all back around. If you had to do it differently as far as your career goes, what might you have changed? And let me say, I think you've had a very impressive career. So,
I think if I would have learned earlier on, I've learned this, but I could have learned it earlier. If I would have learned earlier on that, the first time anyone does anything, it's the first time they're doing it. And a lot of the time you're falling on your face and you're failing at it, but that's everyone's first time. So the sooner you can get outside of your comfort zone, and push your boundaries, the greater opportunity and trajectory you'll set yourself up for within your career.
Yep. Well said. Well said. So, I want to thank you for being a guest here on the Anti-Architect podcast. You have an extraordinary career thus far. I'm excited to see kind of where you take everything in the future. And I thank you tremendously for being here. And then to see and read more about Indigo River, visit their website at www.indigoriver.com. And is there any other website you want to plug?
We're on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, where we also have TMS Waterfront. I've really enjoyed being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Awesome.